What's up, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the official Colts podcast here on the Colts Audio Network and on the Colts YouTube page. No Jeffrey Gorman this week. He is on assignment.
On assignment. Yes.
Spending some time with his lovely fiancée.
Yes. In a warmer climate than this.
In a warmer climate than this. I just read Stephen Holder's story on ESPN about frostbite and NFL games. Fascinating.
Oh, really?
Great job by Stephen. Yeah. About how
this
guy went to the Chiefs-Dolphins game last year. And it was, negative 27 wind chill.
There were fans that died.
No.
Right?
There were no fans that died.
Well,
but
the guys that were outside of their house or whatever, that whole thing, I'll find the story.
Yeah, but there were reports of fans getting, amputations after going to that game. I don't know. I get why you would want to go to a game when it's that cold out.
3 Kansas City Chiefs fans were found frozen to death in the backyard of their friend's home on January 9th.
But did they go to the game?
They were Chiefs fans.
Goodness.
I don't know, but yes.
Yeah,
so,
those temperatures are dangerous, and also they're coming to Indy now.
Yeah.
You couldn't pay me to go to a football game outside when it's below. Honestly, probably when it's below freezing.
You feel like that there are certain fan bases that are equipped for it. Like Buffalo, they've got the gear.
Yeah.
You got to figure it out, right? Because you're shoveling yourself out of a tundra a number of times when you're
right.
in Buffalo. What you got to have, the electric gloves, the electric underlayer type of things.
I thought that in this article, people brought pieces of cardboard to stand on so the concrete didn't.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think about how if you are in a stadium that has those aluminum benches, which not necessarily a ton of NFL stadiums really do.
Buffalo
but,
might, though.
Buffalo, I was going to say, doesn't Green Bay, I think.
Yeah.
Think about how cold those would be, right?
Yeah, that's... I'm from Chicago. I'm supposed to be, tough and, cold weather, let's do it. And I was no. I learned growing up in Chicago that I don't like cold weather.
That's why you're in a press box.
Exactly. That's why I love working for the Colts, where we got an indoor stadium.
Yeah.
We can open the roof if we want, but when it's freezing cold out or snowing, it is beautiful 70 degrees inside.
Okay, speaking of when I was watching the Bills game, Dan and I, my husband and I were talking, and you could see the stadium, the new stadium being built not far from Highmark Stadium. Is the new stadium in Buffalo going to have a roof, or is it open?
It's outdoors.
Okay.
Which I like. I do like the teams that lean into it and their fan bases lean into it, like Buffalo and Green Bay. Mm-hmm. Because, that's a thing in Buffalo, right? We all remember that snow game the Colts played where you couldn't see anything.
There's a reason Lambeau is the frozen tundra, right?
Adam Vinatieri should be a first ballot Hall of Famer based on making a kick in that game.
Yeah.
That was insane. But no, Colts fans are lucky that we have an indoor stadium. Mm-hmm. Just leave it at that. You don't have to worry about frostbite. You can go support your team, and you don't have to, layer up. One of these guys was saying in it that it's he had to put on, he had all these layers, and he was I think he was in the Marines or something. He had all these layers, but he knew that if he wore them in the car going to the game, he would start sweating, and then he would step outside the car and the sweat would freeze, and that could potentially expose him to frostbite.
So did he ride in the car in something else and then add the layers
And then
later?
he added the layers when he got to the stadium.
Okay.
But you don't have to think about this when you go to a Colts game. It's great.
Yeah.
You just show up.
I remember cross-country meets. It was one morning we woke up for the NCAA cross-country championship in Iowa, Waterloo, Iowa, if you will. In late November, it was 6 degrees. 6.
So does that make you run faster or slower?
Well, I mean, me or most people, or I don't know. I just remember one of my lasting impressions of my collegiate cross-country career was my eyes were watering because, it just hurts. When the wind is whipping, right? It's coming straight at you. My eyes were watering and my tears were frozen to my face. So I was simultaneously sweating, but also had frozen tears. I was probably also in pain and, about 2,000 meters to go in a 6K race.
Yikes.
But, yeah.
Fortunately, again, we don't have to deal with that.
Speaking of great writing, though, this week, shout out, I was telling you about this, I believe, Jordan Rodriguez and her article on the LA Rams organization and the response with the fires in LA and all of that. Phenomenal work, as always. If you're kind of just perusing and, reading some different articles regarding playoff teams, especially when you see what LA did on Monday night. How did they not have something greater than just this game on their minds, right? When you see how motivated they were. But it was just really well told of how much they were all not only impacted, but also really, took to heart what was going on back in LA that caused the game to be moved to Arizona. And, I wouldn't say you totally lost home field advantage, but you shifted away from being able to play at SoFi, and just what the players had all sacrificed. And a great reference to, I think it was one of the O-linemen who brought his Great Dane. They were able to bring their pets along with them, in addition, of course, to their families and all.
How do you think Tugboat would do on a plane? We're going to get to some Colts stuff here in a little bit, but how do you think Tug would do on a plane?
You know what? I have absolutely no idea.
Tug is a horse.
Tug,
like Larra's dog is a horse.
He's an English Mastiff, about 140-pound English Mastiff. If you've seen The Sandlot, that's him for the most part. He'd settle in after a while. I'd be very curious. Like, he'd just, as long as he could, he'd be like latched on. He's very much like, he's a Velcro dog. So
before we talk about, we're going to get into Chris Ballard's press conference that he had on Friday. We didn't have a chance to react to that on last week's podcast. Before we do that, though, I do want to talk about Wild Card Weekend and just some general impressions from watching the games. And Houston's defense, we've seen this a couple of times, where, Anthony Richardson had a real tough game against Houston, right? In week 8. That was the last one before he got benched. Justin Herbert threw 3 interceptions all season, and he threw 4 on Saturday in that loss to the Texans, 32-12. He completed 43.8% of his passes. He was 14 of 32 for 242 yards. I just want to read off some notable numbers that the Texans did to opposing quarterbacks this year. Tua Tagovailoa in Week 15, he went 29 of 40 with 3 touchdowns for only 196 yards. I watched that game from the Denver press box. They could not move the ball. Jared Goff threw 5 picks. He completed, 15 to 30 passes. Now, Detroit won that game, but he threw 5 interceptions against Houston. Josh Allen in Week 5, he went 9 of 30. That's a 30% completion rate in that game. Caleb Williams, he had a passer rating of, that was at 51. Anthony Richardson in Week 8, his passer rating was 48.3. He completed 10 of 32 passes. And then Trevor Lawrence, before he got hurt, in that game in Week 13, he went 4 of 10 for 41 yards with an interception. That Houston defense is really good.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of knew that here, but with all the focus, Larra, on Houston's offense and the struggles they've had over the season.
And the injuries they've had.
And the injuries, yeah. I mean, their line got banged up. No Diggs, no Tank Dell. They were certainly banged up, but the focus is sort of on their offense maybe not reaching expectations. That defense, if they play like that again against the Chiefs this weekend, they might be playing in the AFC Championship. That was an A-plus defensive effort by them.
And I do think that that goes to some of the investment that they made, defensively with the moves that they made. They obviously brought in Danielle Hunter was one of those, and obviously an impactful player up front. And that's one of the things that they did really, really well was, get to the quarterback, disrupt the quarterback, and the timing and the passing rhythm and all of that. I think it's kind of too, with D'Amico Ryans, a clearly defensive-minded, head coach. It's you got to go back to that's sort of his bread and butter, right? That's what part of the core of what his team is going to be built upon, being that very, attacking type of defense. And then I also think it goes to having playoff experience for a team.
Yeah.
And what they were able to do last year when CJ Stroud was a rookie and be able to take, a significant core group of that and bring that back in, I think that's immensely beneficial when you get a taste of it in one season and then you're able to go back to it. I also think it goes to, you figure out a lot about who you are and who you have around you when you endure a degree of adversity over the course of the season. And I think the Rams are kind of a testament to the same thing. They started 1-4.
Yeah.
Again, they're a team that has been playoff tested. A guy like Matt Stafford knows how to get it done. There are a number of guys on that defense, of course. Like you think about losing Aaron Donald, everyone, of course, kind of wrote that defense off to some degree.
They spent no money on defense this year, and their defense was awesome on Monday.
9 sacks?
Yeah.
9.
I heard this. They spent the
and everyone thought it was going to be the Vikings defense and Brian Flores and all of that. But sorry,
they spent the least amount of cap space on their defense of any team in the NFL this year, and they went out and they just did that to the Vikings. 9 points.
And how funny is it? Like, the Rams are somewhat of an anomaly because what was it a few years ago where they basically had like no draft picks? They had like just, they'd spent everything via, trade and acquisitions and all of that. So I think it's interesting in terms of a team that necessarily hasn't approached every offseason with the same type of philosophy, but has adapted things differently and figured out, where you're investing and doing those different things. And then just being able to, look to Sean McVay. And, one of the things in the Jordan Rodrigue article was, she talked a lot about how challenging 22 was and his growth as a head coach out of that and how he's, had to adapt. And I think it'd be interesting from D'Amico Ryan's perspective of when they got knocked out last year, what were the lessons that he took, that they took? How many times did he draw upon that over the course of this season to challenge his players, especially with a young quarterback like C.J. Stroud, who endured, some ups and downs over the course of his sophomore season, if you will, in the league.
It was not a linear progression for him.
But a testament to them to be able to figure out ways to grow through it and, to see what they've done in terms of the pieces around him, when he lost, a Diggs, a Tank Dell, different players like that, and how they've had to adapt for a number of those factors.
I want to just kind of try to talk through this because I don't know where I stand on it. But you look at some of these results, and a lot of the complaints from people about Wild Card Weekend is none of those games were any good, except for Commanders and Buccaneers. You got a lot of blowouts. You've got a 20-point win for the Texans, a 14-point win for the Ravens, a 24-point win for the Bills, a 12-point win for the Eagles, and an 18-point win for the Rams. For those teams that lost, is it enough to say we made it into the playoffs only to get waxed? Like, I don't know where I fall on this because I think playoff experience does matter. And especially when you say you're the Chargers, you're Jim Harbaugh. You've got proof of concept now. Hey, this thing works. If you're the Broncos, you're Sean Payton, and you're a player on that team. Hey, Sean's got us. We're in a really good place.
And you're Bo Nix, and you're a rookie, and you're getting that type of experience of going into a Buffalo and seeing, that.
But then if you're the Steelers or the Packers, where you had maybe higher expectations coming into the year, is it enough to say we were the 7th seed, we were the 6th seed, and we were kind of uncompetitive? That Packers game was close. Their defense played really well. But, is it okay to get just, stiff-armed 20 times by Derrick Henry? And that, like, I don't know where I fall on that. Like the Vikings, I think their season's probably a disappointment. Like but also then, it's a disappointment in the sense that they won 14 games and got bounced in the first round. But I think if you would have told Kevin O'Connell in week 1, you're going to win 14 games, you'd be like, I'll take that any.
And not have J.J. McCarthy, and you're going to lean into Sam Darnold, and
But the point here is, we talk about the Colts, and the Colts haven't made the playoffs since 2020. And Chris Ballard said in his press conference is that he wants to not just make the playoffs, but be a real player in the playoffs. I think for certain teams, it's important to be competitive in these games. And for other teams, maybe it's just important just to get there. I don't know, though, where I totally fall if there's like a blanket thing on this. Maybe there's some gray area there.
I have a tough time with anyone who is in the NFL just being like, yeah, we made it to the playoffs and we're okay. I feel like that you have such elite competitors, and if you are in a building that makes it to the playoffs, you have to have the mentality of we're just as good as anybody else to be here, right? Like the season resets when you get to the postseason. Doesn't matter how you got in. You can be a wild card team and go to the Super Bowl. So I feel like that I don't think any of these teams that got beat during Wild Card Weekend are walking out saying, at least we got there, right? Like taking the consolation prize, taking the moral victory. I don't think that there is any, maybe you have a handful of people, individuals, but I would say as a whole, you probably have no one who's complacent with that. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have gotten to the playoffs to begin with.
Right. No, that's probably a good point. And the other thing, too, is like, okay, I think getting playoff experience does matter, but it's not like this this thing that's going to like vault your franchise into, like, we talk about like CJ Stroud and linear progression. Like, it doesn't always mean, you make the playoffs in year one of a head coach being there. That doesn't mean you're going to make it again. And I saw it in 2018 when I covered the Bears. They went 12-4. They won the NFC North. They got bounced out by the double doink. And it's like, okay, all they got to do is fix their kicker, and they're good. And they went 8-8 the next year and didn't make the playoffs. That stuff does happen. So I do think, I think, and this is to Chris Ballard's point, it isn't just enough to make the playoffs. And I think that's what this Colts team, to kind of transition us into actually talking about the team that's in the name of this podcast, is I think that's the goal. It's not just let's improve to get to the playoffs. It's let's improve to the point where we can be competitive in the playoffs, where we don't get bounced in the wild card round.
And do you know who I think is a testament to that, and how quickly things can turn around, and how quickly you can go from being a team that's not even in consideration, not even in competition, to being a contender? Washington.
Yep.
I'm trying to find right now. I should have had this. I wasn't prepared to go this direction with it, but I'm trying to. What were they last year? What was
I think
their?
They won 5 games.
Yeah.
Let's see.
That's what
they went 4-13.
There we go. Just found it. Yeah.
Yep.
But the leadership of Dan Quinn, drafting Jaden Daniels. I mean, so much of this. But then you also have, core guys who have been there, like a Terry McLaurin, who has endured so many seasons of struggle.
Yeah.
But has been one of those who you're like, we can build around someone like this.
Yeah.
Just having that, I think that is a testament to a team that got the pieces in place. They were aggressive in certain areas, and they went from being, a team who was like, oh yeah, we'll take the consolation prize of making it in. Oh no, this looks like a team that's going to give teams fits the rest of the way ahead. I'm trying to look now. Now I'm jumping ahead. We're all over the place. Now I'm going to who they have coming up next. Okay.
They've got Detroit, which
oh, that's right. Okay.
But I mean, I think that's such a good point that if you got a couple pieces there.
Yeah.
And you hit on the quarterback, it can take off immediately. And I think that's what the Colts are still kind of striving for. And we're going to get into the Anthony Richardson of all this here. But I want to start where we took maybe 4 of the biggest bites from Chris Ballard's press conference. And just let's talk about them. Let's talk about what we heard, what it might mean for the Colts going forward. So this is the first one, and this is about Chris Ballard's philosophy and how he's constructed the Colts roster. So this is kind of the starting point, I think, of maybe what direction the Colts are going to go in the offseason. So here's this first quote from Chris Ballard.
Talk about your outlook and your philosophy, which you talked about from day one. Did you go maybe too far in being too rigid with it?
Yeah, I did.
And so now what?
Good question. Here's where the hardest thing to do is evaluate your own team. I think this is across the board in the NFL. And look, I'm emotional and I care about our players. And I think sometimes I've let that bleed into how I built the team. All right. And coming off a year last year when we were 9-8, I thought we were playing really good football at the end of the season. Lost a tough game at the end to Houston. Could have gone either way. And I'm thinking, okay, we're trending up. And instead of really creating competition throughout and throwing new blood into the locker room, new players into the locker room, I said, you know what, we're going to run it back. That was a mistake. It was. I think Buckner said it. Buckner had some comments that I thought were just excellent, where about complacency, about ego, and he's right. Buck is right. Man enough to say it, 1, which I love, and 2, his assessment was right, and that falls on me. It does. I bet on that we could bring players back and they would be as upset about what happened at the end of the season last year that they'd want to rectify it. And at the end of the day, we were not able to. and I didn't do a good enough job creating enough competition throughout the roster and keep everybody on edge. Look, nothing's better. Look, at the end of the day, what we do, like, we do it in the public eye. There's a lot of money that people make in this profession, but Bill Parcells always talks about achievement. And at the end of the day, it's about competition and achievement. I mean, that's essentially what it boils down to. And I didn't create enough competition on the roster for it to want to achieve in the way it needed to achieve. There's got to be some stress. There has to be. There has to be real stress within that locker room and an uncomfortability that if I don't play well enough, my will not be on the field playing. That directly falls on my shoulders. I mean, it's a lesson. It's a crappy lesson that I've learned. I do a pretty good job self-evaluating. Now, I'm hard-headed, and I will talk myself way back into, I was right. But no, this occurrence, I was wrong.
All right, so I think this one, Larra, this was interesting in that he took what DeForest Buckner said and validated it and echoed it, that there wasn't enough competition on this roster, which then led to some complacency. I don't think in this sense, and Chris made this point, all the guys the Colts re-signed for that continuity-focused offseason last year, none of them did not deserve to be back. They all earned their opportunity to come back. But maybe in the totality of all of that, there wasn't enough maybe friction in the locker room.
Yeah.
And I think that then played out to, you saw a season where you lost these devastating games to Houston, to Denver, to the New York Giants, that maybe that all sort of got connected a little bit here. What did you kind of digest from this quote?
Looking at this, the Colts started the 2024 season with a league-high 81.7% of the same players from 2023. 81.7.
Well, think about the guys who weren't back. It was Zach Moss. It was Gardner Minshew. And those are two guys who were backups, really. They had to play elevated roles, but they were brought in to be backups.
Right. And it was a team that finished 9-8 and just missed, obviously getting into the playoffs last year. And it is worth noting, like, Samson Ebukam was your highest sack leader.
We're going to get to Samson Ebukam because I got
that's a significant loss for you, obviously, that I think a lot of people probably didn't realize the significance of it when it happened. Probably
it's at the start of training camp, and it's almost like he's out of sight, out of mind by the time the season starts.
I think that there is a way. I think you can retain guys, but also create competition. I think that what you have to do is challenge the guys that, yes, we brought you back, but that does not mean that you can continue to deliver the exact same number year in, year out, have the exact same contribution, and just, we're talking about being linear.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you still need to progress off of that. So I think, to me, you can bring guys back and create competition. I think you can, to some way, do both. But what you have to do is create competition at insignificant areas. And I think, in an area like wide receiver, you did that and you saw the results with the year that Alec Pierce had. I think maybe had you created a little bit more competition, say in the secondary, maybe could that have possibly done, for a group like that?
Right.
So I'm just kind of pointing out, those are high impact areas of football, right? When you look at, key players, premium players in premium positions, right?
I will say, though, the other two, like, as I was thinking about this, is like the spots that were the competitions during training camp, right? It was wide receiver. It was Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. It was safety. We didn't know what the Colts were going to do at safety, and it was, where's Nick Cross going to play? Is he going to play? And then it was cornerback with Jalen Jones, Juju Brents, and Dallas Flowers. I think you can make a case that Alec Pierce, Nick Cross, and Jalen Jones all showed the most growth from 2023 to 2024 of any players on this team because they're in that competition. Now, the secondary absolutely has to be better. Maybe, those guys individually grew, but I think in terms of that group playing as a unit, maybe there's still a little left to be desired there. But I think you go into next year now feeling like, hey, we got some real players in those guys. But just because you feel like that does not mean, Larra, you cut off avenues to competition for those guys.
And I also think, too, that when you bring guys back, I think that it also has to be hey, this is why we're bringing you back, but this is also how we expect you to raise the bar from here. I'm curious as to what was the clear command to each of those guys when you brought them back? Because when you talk about these are veterans, these are leaders within the franchise. What were they doing to make their position groups better? What challenge was placed upon them to make their position groups better? Because you think when you get to a certain point, and it's not going to be the same for every position, but I'm going to kind of point to year 4, you're an upperclassman, so to speak, right? So if you're a guy who's been in this building for 3 and 4 years, you should probably have a pretty significant role in terms of elevating the rest of the guys around you.
The other part of this is competition doesn't always look like you're splitting training camp reps and, this is this everyone's writing about it every day, what you did in practice, kind of like we did with Adonai Mitchell and Alec Pierce. But competition can just be that uncomfortable sense of okay, they brought this guy in. I'm still the starter, but I've got to raise my game because this guy we brought in is pushing, and he's going to push for that. He might be getting those reps with the 2s, but you just kind of have that. It's like that friction again that Ballard talked about.
And just the fact that you didn't get it done. You're still a team that missed the playoffs. That should motivate you more than anything.
Which is kind of what Chris Ballard thought would happen, and it didn't. Which is, and he took he took a lot of accountability in that press conference. He put everything on his own decisions in building this roster. I do think sometimes though it's got to come from the players. You can't be in the locker room all the time. It's got to kind of come from the bottom up.
Well, and your role is someone in bringing the players in, vetting the players who are brought in, brought back, re-signed, all of that. And then there is a caliber to where's the development with those players once they are here. And I think that is the piece that we will really see honed in on over the next 6 months is the pieces that you're bringing back. When you do, the guys who, whether it's, free agency, different situations, guys who you're exploring from outside, bringing in, draft, all of that. Now, what are these specific plans for each of these groups moving forward? Not just making sure you've got the guys who you want and who you feel like are a good fit, but once they get here, what are they doing?
Right. All right, let's talk about the quarterback. Here is a bite from Chris Ballard talking about Anthony Richardson, and the question was just what after 2 years tells you that he's the guy?
It always comes down to the quarterback. What after 2 years tells you that he's the guy?
Well, look, I don't think we can completely stamp it. We've seen some good things. I mean, we knew. Look, I like Anthony, and Anthony's done some really good things. All right, but there's been some potholes too. I think the number one thing. I mean, let me track back a little bit here. We knew when we took him it was going to be a roller coaster. I don't think I did a very good job. I think I explained that it's going to take some time, but look, I got excited too about the talent and the wow plays, but now we need the consistency down after down. But the number one thing we have to figure out and what Anthony's got to work through is staying healthy. You've got to stay. He's got to be able to stay healthy, and that to me is probably the biggest question right now because now we're going on 2 seasons in a row, where he's dealt with injuries. So that's the first thing, and then number 2, being consistent, getting a consistent, down after down, play after play, consistency with him, and that takes time. I think the one thing you can see with look, we have zero patience as a league with quarterbacks. I mean, you're seeing it throughout the league where guys fell one place and now all of a sudden they're doing really well somewhere else. You know, every quarterback's journey and developmental cycle is different. And, you know, I wish I had a magic wand that could wave it and get them to the top of the peak right away, but that's not realistic. The good news is, you know, even with the back, which we think will be fine, he's going to go into the offseason healthy, all right, which last season he didn't. He was rehabbing a lot. So that's going to give him a chance to work on some things going forward that we think will help going into next season. Now, saying all that, we can't beat our head against the wall. We've got to have competition at the position just for the fact that competition makes everybody better. And then two, he's not proven he can play 17 games.
All right, so Larra, we're talking about competition and players elevating their game based on competition.
Yep.
It sounds like, and this is not a guarantee that it's going to play out this way, it sounds like the Colts are going to very much consider, and may do this, bringing in a quarterback who can compete directly with Anthony Richardson in 2025. How do you think that would go? And I think the biggest question I have about this is the Colts' best case outcome still that Anthony Richardson improves from year 2 to year 3. He is your starter in 2025, and he grabs hold of that job after a competition.
Yeah. 100%. That's the boat. Are you there too?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
but
as
I was like digesting this quote,
Yes.
I was like, I'm pretty sure the goal of it is not to have the guy you bring in to compete necessarily start. If he needs to and he wins it, that's great. But the best case is Anthony Richardson's like, okay, here we go, year 3, I'm taking my game to another level, and if I don't, I'm not going to be the starter.
Because hands down, Anthony Richardson has still made some of the most jaw-dropping plays we have seen in the last year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we still have not seen the ceiling. We have seen the flashes of greatness in the passing game, you know, as a running quarterback, you know, shredding guys off of his body, 2 and 3 defenders to elude sacks. There is a level of athleticism and physicality that is unlike, I'll say it, any other quarterback in the league right now.
I would agree with that. I mean, he's the stuff he can do in terms of his pocket mobility, his pocket presence, the arm talent, like you mentioned, Larra, the running talent. There is a lot that still can be harnessed there, but it's going to take a lot for that to happen. It's going to take Anthony on his own making those strides this offseason.
I think it's going to take everything. I think this is where, you know, have you ever been in the point where like you're searching for something in your house and you're like, specifically, I need this one item. I need this
All the
one
time.
item, right? And you're like, I think it's in the basement. And you're digging through and you're opening up like every box, every storage bin. And you're like, you know what? It might be in the top shelf of that closet. Let me go up there. And you go and you explore that. And then you make your way up to the ceiling, right? And at one point you've kind of, or the ceiling, the attic, excuse me, which is kind of the ceiling.
It's kind of the ceiling.
You're exploring all levels to figure out what it is. You are leaving no stone unturned. This is what your offseason has to be for Anthony Richardson. You pull out every tool, you explore every nook and cranny that is in the structure of Anthony Richardson. You bring in competition. You know, you do what you have to, you know, as a coaching staff. You know, from a standpoint of, you know, the rest of the offense, maybe, you know, working together, doing all of these things. Whatever you have to do or whatever you feel like is at your disposal to see, you make sure that you are tapping every bit of potential and equipping him to see what he can do in terms of, you know, not only playing with consistency, but also consistently being on the field, because that's one thing that Chris said. He hasn't proven he can play 17 games. I think, you know, to me, I just want to see the consistency across, you know, being able to make the intermediate throws, right? All of that, you know, being more consistent in the passing game, all of that, because the completion percentage, of course, is a concern based on what it is.
47.7%. That whatever reasons there were for that, the throwaways, the drops, whatever, you cannot live as an offense in that number.
Yeah. So I'm saying you go through every level of the house to explore and put everything in place to see and to feel like, too, I think that, you've got to show him we're here to help put you in a position to succeed as well. And that's also the investment that we're going to expect out of you.
Right. I think expectation-wise, I don't think you're expecting him to become Josh Allen immediately, right? Like
Josh Allen wasn't Josh Allen immediately.
Right. It took him a while. But I think like that growth from year 2 to year 3 that you would want to see, I think you hit it on the head, Larra. It starts with him playing in 17 games, or being as available as he possibly can and showing that. Because I do think if he is consistently out there and we don't have this kind of start and stop nature of his season where, he, like last year, he came back off the shoulder injury. He played in 4 games and he got hurt. Then he comes back for 2 games and he gets benched. And then he comes back for 5 games and he gets hurt. If you can get some sort of consistent, hey, he played for 3 straight months, I do think that will lead to natural improvement as he gets more experience and more reps. But that's why it's got to start with him staying healthy.
And to me, one of the biggest factors in that is the fact, one of the things we learned, that it doesn't seem, we talked about this briefly last week, doesn't seem that this back injury or back issue that he was battling is going to cause any sort of a procedure or any of that. That's something he can do some rehab through. And Chris pointed to, he's coming out of the season healthy. It's different for him going into 2025 than it was a year ago. He was still rehabbing this shoulder, right? He wasn't throwing until late February or March, maybe, whenever that was.
Then, the throwing is different when you still might have in the back of your head the shoulder. And
right.
It'll that's a different thing where he can go down to Jacksonville and start working whenever. He can be up here and, work whenever. It's not showing up for rehab. It's not getting cleared. It is all about his play on the field. And I think that is a huge point and something that we do need to consider and give him a little bit of grace for is that the timeline he has been through in his career is difficult. Like, it's one thing to sit as a rookie. It's another thing to sit as a rookie because you're hurt.
Yeah.
You're not as... It's different. Like, everyone will tell you, Larry, it's different when that's the case.
And in regards to the competition factor itself, I mean, I know it was a relatively, narrow amount of time, so to speak, but when he was competing with Gardner Minshew prior to being named the starter, he handled that really well.
Yeah.
I thought that he did thrive in that. And I do think, too, he learned a lot alongside, swapping snaps with Gardner, rotating those first team reps with him. I do think that, and, we're talking, that's a difference. That's being a rookie draft pick versus being, 2 years into the league, all of that. But still, I think when you look to Anthony, you're like, okay, no, this is the guy who can thrive in these situations, who will adapt to this and handle this positively from what we gathered at that point.
Right. And the last thing on this is there are a number of avenues you can go about to add this competition. You could go through free agency. You could explore a trade. You could go through the draft. You could find a different way to do this. I think what's going to be interesting over the next couple of weeks is, we think about looking ahead to the combine and, okay, that's the next time we're going to hear from Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen about this. They're not going to tip their hand. Like, if they go into the combine and say, yeah, we'd love to sign a veteran quarterback, and it falls through, well, then, what happened?
Right.
You're not going to get that until it happens. And I think what'll be interesting is what Anthony feels about that kind of in the moment. And I think we got to peek into that on Locker Cleanout Day when he was asked, would you welcome a competition? And he said, absolutely. I'm a natural competitor. If that's the direction they take, I'm all for it. If they don't go that way, I'll still compete. I'm all for it. So I think he, like you mentioned, Larra, I think he thrives in those moments. I think he is mentally prepared for it. And that would inform you that maybe bringing someone in who could take his spot would be a benefit to Anthony, to the Colts. And look, if Anthony isn't able to do it, then you've got a guy who hopefully will have earned it, who can step right in there. So that's going to be interesting. Now, speaking of free agency, let's go to the next bite from the press conference, which was about free agency. Here you go.
If you're going to change the way you do things, talent acquisition is a team, right? As you and Mr. Irsay, what are y'all going to do differently to bring in different kinds of players?
Last year, we didn't completely abstain from free agency. And we've actually done things in the past. So I just think we have to be we have to do a better job identifying the free agents that we want to sign and then being able to close the deal on them. And that's up to me. It really is. It's not Mr. Irsay. He'll let me do what I need to do. And my staff. We have to be able to do that.
So watching this and saying this general tone, you kind of falling on the sword that we've seen and we've heard it before.
Yep.
Why will this be different?
What I would tell you, I told you I'm hard-headed and stubborn, and I think y'all know me well. Look, I don't sit and blame others. It's just not. Now internally we'll have some discussions, but I just don't think it's productive for me to sit up here and just freaking go scorched earth and act. Look, I'm the one in charge of football. I'm the one that deserves to be blamed, but also I've learned some very hard lessons with my stubbornness of I had a vision of building something, and it needed to be a vision of building that could actually win and keep competition going in that locker room. And that is where I fell short. It is. I kick myself for taking a couple years to be so daggum stubborn. No, and when you look at, like, if you look back at our good seasons, like 20, I mean, we trade for Buckner, we add Phillip Rivers, 21. I mean, even, like, it sucked how 21 ended. 21, we were a good football team. Like, I know some of y'all would disagree. You don't go beat 4 or 5 playoff teams. We faltered at the end for some reasons. But we had made some moves in. We had signed Justin Hughes, like, we had signed the right people, and then I just got, for whatever reason, in my thick head, you know what? We're gonna really double down on our own guys.
All right, Larra, does this signify that the Colts are going to radically change their approach to roster building this offseason? Or hear me out.
Okay.
Could it be a return to more of what we saw out of the Colts and Ballard from 2018 to 2021? Right, where you bring in Danico Autry, you trade for DeForest Buckner. Even in 2023, we're talking about using free agency. The Colts in 2023 went out and got Samson Ebukam on a, it wasn't like they splashed around a ton of cash for it, but it was a good contract. It was and that worked out where you brought him in.
Matt Gay as well, right?
Matt Gay was Gardner Minshew was part of that class too. But I think Samson specifically was you used free agency to target a player who you thought had some upside. Mm-hmm. And Samson never had more than, I think, 5 sacks in a season. He had 9.5 in 2023. That right there, that was a successful free agent signing. Regardless of whether, he gets hurt, obviously he doesn't play in 2024. But those are the kind of moves that I think really do elevate the rest of your team when you bring in a guy, you have a vision for him, and then he maybe even exceeds what you thought he could do.
I like the idea of looking back at that plan, that 18 to 21 stretch, and looking at what you did and looking at what you did well, and then also looking at maybe what you lacked in that. I think that there is a degree of looking to elements to the formula that have been beneficial for you, the trade for DeForest Buckner being one of the bigger swings that we have seen, and how well that has delivered for you. I think that it's not going to be, I think, a drastic, we're going to flip everything completely upside down. But I do think you have to approach it more aggressively than you have in the past because the results haven't been there.
Right.
You haven't won the division. You haven't gotten the playoffs since 2020. And you failed to close out the biggest games of your season. You didn't win the games you should have, and you couldn't win the games that you had to. And I think that is worth addressing because there are clearly some voids within what is there currently. So what are you doing to, fill those and, elevate the rest of it? So, yeah, I mean, I think that you kind of, I think you're going to have to go out and be more aggressive and maybe take a few more risks, so to speak, because you at least have to say, we've done this, we've made some moves, we're shaking up, we're challenging ourselves. And to Chris Ballard's credit, he said, I've been stubborn. And he realizes, and I think that comes with an immense amount of growth, as a leader, when you want to, be steady and kind of believe in a process and commit to a process and, have a way you go about things that works to a certain degree. But then you also have to, reevaluate that and see where it's gotten you and think about, where are those areas in which that plan didn't get you to the ultimate goal, didn't find you to where you need to get to. So I think that there's a balance between it, but I do think that you're going to have to be more aggressive than we've probably ever seen.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, the taking risks part, operating in free agency is a risk. You're taking a player from another team, another system, and putting him into your own program, which doesn't always work. Just because you spend the most money doesn't always mean it's going to work. But sometimes it does.
I'd also say the guys who you've had in your building for 5 years that you know all the most about, that also doesn't always work.
Right,
You know
exactly.
what I mean? Committing to...
Spending any money in the NFL is a risk.
Right.
At some point. You have to be targeted with it. I look back in 2020 where the Colts that offseason, you trade for DeForest Buckner. That's a hit. You sign Phillip Rivers. That's a hit. You sign Xavier Rhodes. That was a hit.
Yeah.
It's not like Xavier Rhodes was a Pro Bowler, but he was a good veteran corner who you were able to drop into that team.
Yeah.
And he made the Colts a better football team.
Yep.
And not all of them are going to work out. You have, Devin Funchess in 2019 didn't really work out.
Yeah.
Right? Carson Wentz in 2021 didn't work out.
Hey, Eric Ebron in 18 worked out for
Right.
you. Right?
Yeah, that was 18. Yeah, Eric Ebron. You can find these guys. It doesn't mean you have to go sign.
Stephon Gilmore in 22 worked out for you.
Stephon Gilmore, right. That the team wasn't very good, but Gilly had a good season. Absolutely. There are avenues to doing this that isn't just you go out and you spend the most cash of any team in free agency, but it's about being targeted and bringing in those guys like a Samson Ebicom, I think, who will come in and elevate the rest of your team, who will bring competition, who will make guys a little uncomfortable.
I mean,
with a new guy coming
just
in.
looking at some of the playoff teams, look at the Ravens going and getting Derrick Henry. The Ravens were already a playoff team, and they went and they go,
And Derrick Henry wasn't the priciest free agent this offseason. Yeah.
I'm just kind of like bouncing around, looking at a few of these, the Lions, a lot of what they've done has been through the draft, aside from the trade for, Jared Goff.
Yeah.
But,
and look at what they did, where, this probably isn't the best example, but they signed David Montgomery and they draft Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah.
You can go about it that way, where you sign a player, but that doesn't cut you off to drafting a player. And the Colts have done this in years past too, where you sign, the last year you re-signed Tyquan Lewis. That doesn't cut you off from drafting Laiatu Latu. That's the right way to approach it. But I do think if you go sign these external free agents and you draft someone there, that does create a little bit of maybe.
That's the good friction.
It's the good friction. Absolutely. You look at Minnesota. They went out. They let Danielle Hunter go last year in free agency. He went to the Texans. They went out and they replaced him with Jonathan Grenard, also from the Texans. Kind of a weird little swap there. But Jonathan Grenard had a great year there, and you're kind of changing things up in the building a little bit. I don't know if this is again the only reason why Minnesota was so good.
Yeah.
But there are examples here where. You don't have to be the Raiders going out and signing Christian Wilkins. You don't have to be the Titans going out and signing Calvin Ridley. But you just find these guys who make your team incrementally better in free agency, and that can then have an impact on the entire roster.
Yep. It's really, really well said.
All right, let's look at one last thing. This is about the defensive coordinator search the Colts are currently going through. Here's what Chris Ballard had to say about that on Friday.
Chris, last year, defensively up here, you took the blame for it.
Yeah.
Gus is gone. You're still here.
Yeah. Look, that falls on all of us, and no doubt. Look, I bet on some young players coming through. Juju gets hurt. Dallas was coming off his injury, and at the end of the day, I did not give them enough. And we've got to in totality have to do better defensively. From a player acquisition standpoint and from a play standpoint.
Do you expect the scheme or system to change?
What's that?
Do you expect the scheme or the system to change? You've always been a fan of the, four-man front. Be honest with you, like a lot of the league, because it's such a heavy nickel league, ends up being a four-man front. Now, you'll see some out of nickel getting into five-man stuff, but Shane and I are working through that. And look, I'm not going to comment on the coordinator of Shane's going to make the hire. Of course, I'll be involved, but we're working through that. We'll have some good candidates for the job. So,
Well, broadly, is there any value to being more aggressive on defense? Because you have been one very specific style for a while.
I definitely think there is value. You got to be able to affect the quarterback. You do.
All right, one other bite that I didn't include in here, Larra, was Chris Ballard said he thought the defensive line played pretty well last year. So there are a lot of reasons why the Colts were not able to get pressure then, that maybe weren't just the D-line underperforming. That's not how he viewed it, but the Colts were a bottom, I think, 5 or 6 team in pressure rate. Mm-hmm. There are, you can get 6-man protections. You can get teams getting the ball out quick because you don't want to be affected by that. But the Colts have to find a way to affect opposing quarterbacks more frequently, however it looks. Do you think, whoever the next coordinator is, there are a lot of names floating out there in reports of who the Colts are talking to.
There are going to be a lot of jobs out there to be filled,
a lot of jobs out there to be filled. This is going to be I think this might be a longer process than we've maybe are accustomed to with coordinator hirings. But whoever that person may be, do you think it's just going to be generally a more aggressive approach than what Gus Bradley did, which was he wanted to have 4 guys win up front, and you're going to play coverage with 7 behind it and very sparingly sprinkle in blitzes?
I think when you look across the league, that's kind of, for the most part, that's the trend that you're seeing. So I do think that just in all likelihood, yes. I think that now I don't think you're going to hire a coordinator on scheme alone and be like, well, because we did this, we have to go this direction.
Right.
I don't think I do think that as you see the evolution of scheme and defensive approach, you are seeing a lot more of that, especially, when you look at, the teams that are in the playoffs, the teams that have gotten there do have a little bit more of that, attacking type of a front. So I think in all likelihood, that's probably going to be something that you look to from that standpoint as well. I think it plays to the strength of you've wanted to build your roster through the trenches. You've invested in your defensive front. So I think it's like, hey, let's bring in a guy who can get the most out of these guys up front who we've invested draft picks in. We invested a trade for DeForest Buckner in. We invested bringing, certain guys back, all of that. I mean, if you look at, the amount of investment there, I think that you would like to see what someone with that type of a scheme would do with the personnel they will inherit. When you think about, obviously Grove and Buck in the middle, you've got Quiddy, you've got Latu, you have Taekwon. You're going to have kind of a wealth with which has been
Samson
invested there. Samson coming back, great point. I think it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think the majority of your sacks are going to come from the D-line. Probably 90%. I don't know that off, accurately off the top of my head, but adding in ways to help the defensive line out where it's not just, okay, you can't get the ball out quick against us because we're playing maybe different coverages. Or, I think the other part of this too is it doesn't have to necessarily be a guy who's got a big D-line background, because you can help the D-line out with the secondary.
Disguises
disguises, making the quarterback hitch for a second.
Yeah.
Too many times we saw opposing quarterbacks just be able to complete these easy access throws to a tight end or a wide receiver that's open. And Latu would win on a pass rush on a one-on-one, but by the time he got around the tackle, the ball was already in the hands of a guy going 8-9 yards downfield. Right. That stuff needs to be
I'm having flashbacks to the Giants game right now.
Right, exactly. Or the Patriots game was one where, Hunter Henry had, it felt like almost every play. The other part of this, too, and I talked about this last week, is whoever the coordinator is, I think it's on the players to tackle better. I think that's, you can be a genius coordinator. Brian Flores' defense doesn't work if guys can't tackle. You know, like you've got to be able to tackle more consistently. That is something that, you know, I'm sure there are coaching points. I'm sure there are angles and different way, you know, guys being in the right position, but sometimes you got to make a tackle and then you got to have guys rallying to the ball. Every single team that won this weekend on Wild Card Weekend, and pretty much every single team that played on Wild Card Weekend, you saw guys flying to the football. You know, Justin Jefferson, there was one play last night on Monday night where he made the first guy miss, and then like 9 Rams players came over and brought him down.
Yep.
And it was shy of a first down. Just like you need to see more of that. And that right there will elevate this defense, regardless of who the coordinator is.
Yeah.
To me, it starts with tackling, and then it's getting more pressure. The coordinator can help with the pressure. I think the guys on that defense got to help with the tackling.
And one of the things that I'll go back to, and I've referred to this game a lot because it's been one of the better defensive performances I think that we have seen of this group. But if you go back to the Colts win over the Ravens from 2023,
Blitzed a lot in that
they
game.
blitzed a ton. I'm pulling it up right now because I've got to go back and look exactly.
If I recall, I looked that up, and that was the most Gus Bradley had blitzed since like 2017.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I'm looking at it. So where is this? Okay, you came out of that game with 4 sacks on Lamar Jackson because you were bringing that type of pressure. I think that and again, the majority of that group you still have in the building. So I think that it is proven that when you have a game plan for that and you're doing more of that, this group can be successful.
Yeah, I think you've seen Zaire Franklin have good moments as a blitzer. You've seen Kenny Moore.
You were both going there.
Yeah, like I was like going through the defense, like, oh yeah, he's had really good moments as a blitzer. It's never really been ingrained in this style of defense, but I think there's maybe a little untapped potential there with this group because these guys.
Zaire had 15 tackles in that game.
Yeah, right. I mean, that sounds about right. I mean, he had an awesome game that day, and they put Lamar kind of in a blender in a way that was. Hey, Lamar won MVP last year. He might win MVP again this year. That style of defense, you're right, it is kind of becoming more in vogue, but it's not all about sending 7 guys on every single play. It's about being targeted with it, being smart with it.
Because there's a risk with that too.
Right, there is. It's about making it confusing for the opposing quarterback. And I think that right there, that doesn't always have to look like you're sending 50% of your snaps, you're blitzing. It can look like it can be in different ways, but I think it just needs to be ratcheted up. Like too often, I think quarterbacks just weren't confused enough by this defense in 2024. So there you have it. That's going to do it for this episode of the Official Colts Podcast. We'll be back next week.
Wait, who you got?
What do you got?
I'm just
we better have you're right. We better have a divisional round preview.
Well,
like right
and then
here.
I was also going to say, who's your pick for the national championship between Notre Dame and Ohio State?
Ooh.
As someone who covered the Notre Dame Fighting Irish,
I did. I actually covered a Notre Dame Ohio State game in 2016 in the Fiesta Bowl. Fun fact.
Ooh.
Ohio State won that game. They had Joey Bosa and Zeke. They won that game pretty handily.
Okay.
I mean, if the Ohio State that beat Oregon and shows up, they're going to win. But Notre Dame, like they've got this sort of like they're really banged up. Like Jeremiah Love's out there playing on like one good leg, and they keep finding ways to win. And Ohio State did not look all that impressive against Texas. They were like one really questionable toss sweep play away from needing to go down and win that game on a last second drive. I like 60% of my brain says Ohio State wins it, but 40% says the Irish win it.
Interesting.
And that's probably more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
Looking at it. What about you? What do you think?
I loved having 5 straight days of football. Like I've been so spoiled,
It's been
right?
so good. I haven't slept at all.
It's been so good. There's just, to me, I don't really have a great explanation for it. There's just something about this Notre Dame team. There's just something to them.
Marcus Freeman's awesome.
Marcus Freeman's awesome. What do you make of him getting NFL head coaching interest?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Certainly made more sense than the previous Notre Dame coach getting NFL head coaching interest that one time.
I'm curious with that. I don't like it's interesting to me because I'm like, oh man, you've got a good thing going right now. Like you really
But
do.
Teams are gonna if you're trying to find like a program builder, a culture builder, like you're probably gonna at least place a call. And I don't know if he would even entertain it, but you'd probably at least place a call. He is a fantastic football coach.
Yeah. He is.
Because Notre Dame, with all the injuries they've had.
I didn't realize he played at Ohio State.
Yeah.
That, I mean, until, obviously the table was set and everything.
Right.
And I was like,
Yeah.
of course. Like,
Yeah, I think he probably wants Notre Dame to win that game.
I would, yes, of course.
Yeah.
But, all right, how are you feeling about the divisional round?
Well, let's see. I mean, I was completely wrong about that Chargers-Texans game. I thought the Chargers were going to win that. So take whatever I say with a grain of salt. I mean, I think Kansas City kind of has been secretly peaking down the stretch. Like, they look like...
No one knows how to do it at the right time.
Yeah.
Better than Kansas City.
This
right?
is like... They feel like those like late stage Tim Duncan Spurs teams where it's like they would just kind of like fart their way through the season and then go win a championship because Tim Duncan was in his late 30s and Greg Popovich is the greatest coach of all time and Andy Reid might be the greatest coach of all time. And I mean, Houston's defense was really good.
Yeah.
That game could be really interesting. I think Commanders-Lions could be a banger of a football game.
Oh my God, yes.
I think I probably like
Battle of the
Detroit at home.
Dans?
Yeah. Dan's Quinn and Campbell. I probably like Detroit at home in that game. Rams, Eagles. Philly did not come out of the gate swinging against Green Bay. And, Matt Stafford.
I know.
I'm not making like any official picks here, but like, man, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams kept that thing real tight.
I would agree with you. One of my things, like, I'm so happy for Saquon Barkley. Like, I'm like, part of me is like, loving this for the Eagles for him because I'm like, what a guy to see him playing at this level after all that he went through early in his career, playing in New York, getting hurt, enduring the injuries, then to be in the position that he is, and just to make like the plays that he makes, the way that he runs, like he's like kind of, for me, I'm like, oh, let them go as far as possible because I just want to watch Saquon Barkley more because I didn't get to watch him enough during the regular season because we were playing. So like, I need more Saquon selfishly.
And then there's also just probably the NFL game of the year, Bills-Ravens
Oh
on
my
Sunday
God,
night.
the battle of the MVPs.
Yeah. I mean, also, shout out to the
Arguable
NFL.
ladder.
Shout out to the NFL for, I forgot that they do this on like divisional round weekend. That game starts at 6:30 p.m. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I will be well rested on Monday because that game starts at a reasonable hour here in the Eastern time zone. And I cannot wait to watch that football game.
That's going to be...
We've had a great 5 days of football, right? This is going to be like Saturday, Sunday into Monday with the college football championship, 3 really, really exciting days of football.
That'll be awesome.
Can't wait.
It'll be awesome.
We'll have a lot to talk about on Tuesday's episode of the Official Colts Podcast next
No
week,
question.
I'm sure. All right, for Larra Overton, I'm JJ Stankevitz. Thanks for watching and listening to this episode of the Official Colts Podcast. Talk to you next week. So long.